Coming up next, we'll be talking about the Pulp Fiction Bible verses.
You read the Bible, Greg?
Yes.
Well, there's this passage I got memorized. Sort of fits this occasion. Ezekiel 25:17. Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger.
And asking, have religious fanatics taken over America?
Wherever I go, God rules. When I walk on White House grounds, God walks on White House grounds. I had every right and authority to declare the White House as holy ground because I was standing there, and where I stand is holy.
Saying no to President Trump would be saying no to God, and I won't do that.
Don't you let these nails fool you. Baby, if I gotta get down and crawl.
Or are they satanic fanatics pushing the country towards destruction? Now, as the country is imploding from within, as we can see, gas prices are rising, the groceries, healthcare, all these issues, neighborhoods look like war zones in America, and the Epstein elites continue to get away with some of the most horrific crimes imaginable. And that's just scratching the surface. Yet, somehow, they're having meetings in Congress about Islam being the problem.
Congressional members on Capitol Hill held a subcommittee hearing today to discuss Sharia law. That's a term you may have heard on your TV screen recently. Many Texas Republican candidates running for public office say they will fight to stop Sharia law.
Did you ever imagine that your high school would become a breeding ground for pro-Sharia material and Islamic conversation?
But the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution assures that no religious law can supersede those laws, and that is protection enough, and that's why, these scare tactics are really just that. It's not a real problem in this country.
And who's really fueling the divide between Muslims and Christians? And my next guest will also give his perspective on what's happening with Dan Bilzerian and Nikki Fuentes. So go ahead and join me next with former rapper, bounty hunter, and now political commentator from the STN network, Stu.
Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness.
Shepherd the lost through the valley of darkness.
It's all Hollywood. It's all theatrics, WWE wrestling, bring about Armageddon so that they can blow up a mosque, build a third temple. Iran never possessed nukes. They had a religious fatwa against the production. I believe that they serve Satan. And that's proven. There is nothing in the Bible that references a Star of David. Right and left, red and blue, the donkey, the elephant, all of that is...
So the Iraq War, clear disaster. People of good faith, including me, supported it. We were wrong.
He was not the only operative. He wasn't the only... In the United States, we have a pipeline of actors and cut off his relationship with his only son and with his grandchildren to remain loyal to Donald Trump. In fact, he killed everybody inside, by the way. There was a private jet that left Orem, Utah, just ahead of Charlie Kirk's death.
Country basically imploding from within. Gas prices skyrocketing, groceries.
There was no benefit to him. There was no upside for him to engage. And
are you talking about when he was pressing the buttons?
This is the Dean Show. This is the Dean Show.
Greetings of peace. Welcome to the Dean Show. Let's bring out our next guest, former rapper, bounty hunter, and now political commentator. Let's get into this clip, and then we'll view it together, and I'll get his reaction, and we'll prepare for an amazing episode here on the Dean Show.
Blessed is he who in the name of camaraderie and duty shepherd the lost through the valley of darkness. For he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children.
Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness. For he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children.
I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to capture and destroy and you will know my call sign is Sandy 1 when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
And you will know my name is the Lord
Stu, how are you?
I'm well, man. Thanks a lot for having me. It's just symbolic of everything that we have been seeing with this administration. It's all fake. Even the Bible verses are fake. It's all Hollywood. It's all theatrics, WWE wrestling. But the problem is that it's also very dangerous, for the blood and treasure of our country. For young American men, as we watch the escalation of, this conflict in Iran, which obviously is not going away, I think that Trump is looking for, some sort of a kind of a reprieve away from the coverage on this thing, because the United States and Israel just continue to take L's in Iran because they have met up with a formidable opponent that is not willing to tangle or negotiate with the Epstein class. And, I've said this before. It seems to me from where I sit that the Iranians are engaged in a war of national survival. And, they know who their enemy is. They know what they're up against. And when you watch military commanders all the way up to this guy who's LARPing as a secretary of war, and these commanders are telling, servicemen, young American men, that they are deploying to a mission that is going to bring about Armageddon so that they can blow up a mosque, build a third temple, usher in the Antichrist after playing in, heifer's ashes, that they burn alive. It's really concerning. So that clip is just it solidifies, it embodies the fakeness and the Hollywood and the theatrics, which oftentimes, we refer to as American politics, as the entertainment arm of the military-industrial complex, which enjoys its headquarters on Rothschild Boulevard in Tel Aviv. It's a bankers' war. It's a private equity war. It's a war for Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. And ultimately, it's a war for the stated objective, which is greater. I don't know why we keep questioning that. They tell us this, almost every day. They roll out the map of greater risk. Benjamin Netanyahu's been to the White House, I think, 6 million times since Donald Trump has been reinstalled as the 47th president. And he brings along his dirty laundry, he brings along his pig wife, and then he brings along the map of greater risk, which seems to continue expanding. And it includes all of the areas that, the United States military, the American war empire, has been spreading democracy over the last 3 decades. So it's not a secret. People should understand this very clearly now. Benjamin Netanyahu said it's a spiritual crusade. He said that greater is the objective. That's not a Stu Peters conspiracy theory. They wear the map of greater in patch form on the sleeves of their IDF uniforms, similar to the uniform or the exact replica of the uniform that Brian Mast wears as a so-called elected, member of Congress to the People's House in D.C. So it's a demonic war. It is an evil war. It's not a war that has any objectives that include anything positive for the United States. There's no upside economically speaking. There is no upside to our national security interests. Iran never possessed nukes. They had a religious fatwa against the production of nuclear weapons. And even if they did, first of all, I wouldn't blame them. I wouldn't blame them for having, nukes to defend themselves against an aggressor who has proven, since May 14th, 1948, that they are the aggressor, that they are the number one state sponsor of terror, that they are a terrorist state. And, but they didn't. They had a religious fatwa against the production of these nuclear weapons. And even if they did have one, they didn't have an intercontinental ballistic delivery system that was capable of reaching the United States. So there was no threat to our country at all. It's not a defensive war. It's a war for it.
So do you think religious fanatics have taken over, and then they're some are trying to, the people you're mentioning, they're trying to now divide us. They're trying to get Muslims and Christians fighting. They're trying to create this deeper divide.
I wouldn't even call them religious fanatics. I would call them satanic fanatics. I don't believe that they serve a God.
Satanic fanatics. That's a good word.
I believe that they serve Satan. And that's proven, by the things that they do. They demonstrate that right out of the open context of Satan himself. And they're doing the bidding of the devil. And they've made a pact with the devil. And they fly the 6-pointed devil star of Remphan on their flag. And they wear it all over the place. So... yeah, I do think, as far as the second part of your question,
what's the star? What's this star? I've heard this. What is it called? The star of what?
Star of Remphan.
Remphan.
So, a lot of people will say that this is the Star of David.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing in the Bible that references a Star of David. It's not biblical at all. And so, but this has been used through the Schofield Reference Bible, bastardized version of Christianity that they teach in these occupied churches throughout our country and throughout the West, where they have convinced Christians that there is like this Judeo-Christian religion, I guess, where it's this morphed version of Christianity that's blended with Judaism, which is Satanism. And it's a fallacy. It's a lie. But what it is, the only star that's referenced in the Bible is the Star of Remphan, which is a false god. And they fly this 6-pointed devil star on the flag. And then you see satanic fanatics like Greg Locke, who positions himself, he calls himself a pastor. He puts himself on stage. He calls the place that he's in a church. And then well-intended Christians fall for this, psyop. And then they go there every week and they get pounded with this propaganda about this Judeo-Christian relationship, about God's chosen people, and about the Bible, which, there's no indication that the May 14th, 1948 founded arbitrary, scribbled on a map, Rothschild purchased illegitimate nation state of is the Bible. It can't be. It's a geographical location that was intentionally put right in the Middle East to keep the Middle East in a constant state of chaos so that they can, dupe and fool and trick and deceive Christians into believing that there is biblical prophecy being fulfilled here, when in fact it is the prophecy of man that is being fulfilled here. And just as God will use people to fulfill biblical prophecy, Satan will use man to fulfill satanic prophecy. And, that's, I believe, what it is that we're seeing here. And all indications, biblically speaking, and what I can see right before my eyes, if you remove the scales and you forget about what's popular or comfortable to say, and you just deal with the truth, it shouldn't be controversial at all to say that these are the objectives, especially when these people are saying this. But to answer the second part of your question about division between Christians and Muslims, these are the two largest faiths, of course, on earth. Islam being, the biggest, of course, just in sheer numbers itself. 2.4 billion people who identify themselves as Christians have been deceived. And now they believe that this is, the Bible, and that these are God's chosen people, and that you must bless this nation state. And they take this stuff completely out of context. But this has been a brilliant, methodical, well thought out plan to gin up the hype of and support from Americans and well-intended people who then obviously volunteer themselves. They enlist in the military. They support, candidates that are, campaigning to run for elected office in our country in another system that is a complete fallacy, which is the two-party system in this country. Republicans and Democrats, right and left, red and blue, the donkey, the elephant, all of that is fake. And that was also meant to divide a country that has, become the most advanced civilization in all of human history. Something to be proud of. It was, a nation that was highly respected militarily. It was highly respected for its, spiritual and cultural and, the foundation of the United States. What it was supposed to be, what it was a great idea. But it became a superpower in the sense that I think was taken out of context. And what I mean by that is Americans have been duped into believing that to be a superpower, that you are the world police, where you run around spreading, democracy. And what democracy looks like is apparently, transgenderism, indoctrination, and degeneracy, and, the Toby Keith version of military might, which is, we'll put a boot in your ass. That's the American way. And patriotism means, dropping bombs on an unsympathetic group of people that the media has portrayed as terroristic, low IQ, goat-herding savages. And that's how Arabs are painted, or Muslims as a whole are painted to the American populace who is watching, the TV screens, the Fox News machines that are hanging from the walls of virtually every American home in their living rooms as they're just beaten relentlessly over the head with the talking points that are, pushed upon them by the very people that profit from the wars. The war profiteers control the media. And so that information flow is extremely dangerous. And yes, to answer your question, this is an agenda that works to divide the largest groups of people, the people who are, required to support the actions of the American war empire, which it's difficult to draw a distinction between the two. They're really one and the same because they serve the same people and they are, attempting to accomplish the same objectives.
Let's get into this next clip.
I have a lot of Muslim friends. I mean, I do. I am not like closed-minded. I'm very open-minded that way. I will just say that my commitment, and it is an actual commitment, to apologizing for things I got wrong. I don't think it's unusual or weird. That's what you yourself are required to do. It's just not complicated. And because that is not required in Washington, because no one is willing to admit fault for anything, and because no one is ever punished for doing evil or lying, we keep getting farther and farther off course. So the Iraq war, clear disaster. People of good faith, including me, supported it. We were wrong. Because they won't admit that, by and large, we're off to some other war.
Yeah.
Under the same false pretenses, serving the same master, which is not America at all. It's the government.
Yeah.
No, that's not anti-Semitic. I'm not anti-Semitic. No one's ever found a single anti-Semitic thing I've ever said because I'm not anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And if I was, I'd probably just say so, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I am opposed to making the same mistake again.
Yeah.
Doing the Iraq war again. That's my bottom line concern. That's what this whole current argument is about, is I said, no, I don't think we should have a regime change war with Iran. Not because I love Iran. I'm a Christian, not a Shiite.
He's saying everything that I just said.
Right? Yeah.
This is true. Well-intended, pure-hearted Christians have been deceived. They have been duped. And we made mistakes about a lot of things. We made mistakes about supporting the war in Iran and efforts in Syria and Libya and, Lebanon and in Afghanistan. We've made mistakes in supporting all of these things. And when you are armed with all of the information, which nobody has an excuse at this point, the information is flowing at, the speed of light. It's breakneck speed. You can pick up any device nowadays and you can easily find the answers to these publicly discoverable pieces of evidence everywhere. So to know these things and then to continue to support them would mean that you are either A, compromised and that you are doing the bidding of evil, because we can see that this is a war of good versus evil very clearly, or it would mean that you are choosing to remain willfully ignorant. And to Tucker's point, I think that there are a lot of people who choose the latter, to remain willfully ignorant, because what they see is that this is coming at them. And what they see is that they have put all of their eggs into a basket where they trust a system and where they ultimately trust a man. And whether that man be Donald Trump or, some other influencer that they follow, they have put their trust in not the message, but in the man. And so there's a difference between supporting Trump, the message, which was an America First message. It was, it wasn't a message from a polished politician. It was a message from a patriotic American who was fed up with the status quo of politics in this country, which was a uniparty full of, corporate criminals and, bagmen that run around scheming and plotting and pillaging and raping the American economy and the American people to the detriment of our country and its people, turning our country into a strip mall economy, which is used for its blood and treasure to wage these wars that, again, have no benefit, no upside for our country or its people. We send our military all over the world. We occupy many countries. If you have an American military base in your country, that means that you're not a sovereign nation any longer. You're an occupied country. And we're occupying these countries on behalf of the occupiers of our country. And the occupiers of our country, obviously, are the people who love to call themselves, they're billionaires. They are private equity overlords. They are, banking and finance titans. They are Hollywood and corporate executives that have all been compromised in one way or another by operations, like the one that Jeffrey Epstein ran. And I think to that point, it's really important to understand that Jeffrey Epstein was not the only operative. He wasn't the only, Mossad or intel agent that was running capture and compromise operations to control high-ranking government officials and powerful people with levers in their hands. And these are unelected bureaucrats as well. People like Jared Kushner, people like Steve Witkoff. And these people are doing the bidding. People like Peter Thiel, who, obviously, J.D. Vance is the creation of Peter Thiel. I call him Vice President Palantir, and soon he will be President Palantir. I think it's important for your audience to understand that here in the United States, we have a pipeline of actors. And if you step back and you look at this with objective eyes, you can very easily see what the future holds. And that when you know that the election process is completely fake and rigged, and when you understand that the two-party system is a fallacy and that it's fake, it's WWE, it's Hollywood, you can see that these people literally respond to casting calls. What's happening in Kentucky right now to Thomas Massie is Miriam Adelson has turned what they call MAGA Kentucky into APAC Kentucky, where they've funneled over $10 million into this small district where Thomas Massie is, because he stands against the Epstein class and he stands with the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And this is something that should be a hill that we can all die on. You would think that, humanity by and large would want accountability for people who are engaged with harming or intentionally snuffing out childhood innocence. But, and I think largely the American people and the global population do agree with that, because largely human beings are well-intended, good-hearted people who admit when they are wrong. But if they have put all their eggs in this basket and they realize that maybe it's too late, they will refuse to remove the blinders and they will stay plugged into the matrix for their own self-preservation, ideological preservation, psychological preservation, spiritual preservation. And I would compare that maybe to COVID-19. If you have a young set of parents or an older set of parents, whoever, that brought their children to be inoculated because they fell for the propaganda, they fell for the PSYOP, and they went and they had them injected with the safe and effective vaccine, and now have come to realize exactly what that was. Can you imagine living with that kind of guilt? Knowing now, like maybe their eyes were opened by something completely different. Maybe it was the data centers, maybe it was Palantir, maybe it was J.D. Vance, and the idea of an AI-driven super surveillance state. Maybe it was something completely different, but then they rewind and they look at all of the tributaries that come off of the mainstream, the objective of greater, the enslavement, the imprisonment, whether it be digital, financial, or even physical, or execution of anybody who is a dissident to this agenda. They find that, hey, that was a decision that I made that actually permanently altered the future of my children. That kind of guilt, I think, is a kind of a mirror image or a representation of all of the other decisions that they may have made. And so whether it's putting all your faith in Donald Trump or into Western medicine or Big Pharma or one of these other, you realize that this is much bigger. And I think that it's hard for people to admit that. And I think that, Tucker being a guy who says, hey, I was wrong. I believe this. And so was I. But I can draw a distinction between Trump the man and Trump the message, whereas a lot of people I don't think have really done that yet. And that number is dwindling. That's a big white pill. I think that there are a lot of people that are waking up, and particularly boomers. Baby boomers, have caught a lot of heat from me because they've been the generation, obviously, that has, been complacent and apathetic and very selfish. I haven't told your audience this. I've said this before, but this hits close to home for me because even my own father, who is an ardent and fervent Trump supporter, just as I was in 2015 when he came down the escalator and he was talking like an American, he was talking like me, he was talking like my neighbors and my community, because we were fed up and we saw that this was a very corrupted system. It was a dangerous and deadly system. It was a divisive system. And so I came off of that a lot earlier and started opposing Trump, unpopular to do so. Took a lot of arrows for that. I was on an island leading up to Trump's reinstallation in 2024. And now a lot of people are starting to see the light on that, and that includes boomers, with the exception of people like my dad, who, again, are just relentlessly pummeled with the Fox News programming machine that hangs on his wall, and it turns on at 4:30 every morning when he gets up. It doesn't turn off until 9 o'clock at night when he goes to bed. And he is in the tank, completely sold out, and remains loyal to Donald Trump, the man, and will make excuses for everything that he does, no matter what. This was the president of mass deportations. He hasn't deported anybody, and now everybody who has taken up residence in this country illegally embedded themselves into the interior of our country with a disdain for America and Americans. These are the people who chant death to America, which is used by the media to say, hey, these are the bad people, these are the villains, when in fact they're chanting that maybe because for the last 30 years, we have been in their countries, occupying their countries, dropping bombs on their children, double tapping their schoolhouses, laying waste to entire rows of housing and hospitals and churches and libraries and schools, and steamrolling entire populations, displacing them throughout the West. And they're now entrenched into our country, maybe with dirty bombs, maybe with weapons caches. I don't know. Maybe with ill intent. It sets up the perfect, formula for these false flag operations. But my dad told me a couple of weeks ago, maybe now going on 3 weeks ago, we were texting about this war in Iran, and I was talking about how there's just no upside for us. I asked him, I know that he drives a diesel truck. I asked him if he's been to the pump. I asked him if he's been to the store, the grocery store, the bodega, the supermarket. I asked him about the cost of goods. I asked him to look at his 401k, his investment portfolio. And he won't look at any of these, dwindling, collapsing, savings or retirement accounts and the cost of goods. He won't look at his depleting economic financial resources. He will only look at what Trump is saying and what the Fox News channel is saying. And he told me that I was being hateful. And he said, I don't know what has happened to you. You've become a completely hateful person, and I'm going to block you. And so he announced that he was going to block my number. I'm his only child, by the way. I'm his only son. I have 3 children, 2 boys, 14 and 11, and a daughter who's 7. This is the age where a grandfather is a big influence in the life of young men, particularly my boys. And he chose to then follow through with that, and he blocked me and cut off his relationship with his only son and with his grandchildren to remain loyal to Donald Trump.
Wow.
So this hits close to home for me, and I see this, and I applaud Tucker Carlson for saying what he's saying. I mean, there's obviously a lot of heat that comes with that. I know that because I've been on an island taking these arrows for quite some time, saying the uncomfortable and unpopular things. But there are people like Tucker who I think, they obviously are going to be relentlessly attacked because they're right, they're correct. And there's irrefutable, indisputable evidence to suggest that everything that Tucker is saying is correct. He's a little bit late on the data centers, but that's okay. He's there now. I wish that he would look into Charlie Kirk a little bit more and what happened there, because we've learned a lot about that. And, particularly relating to Pete Hegseth and the sets of events and occurrences that led up to Charlie's death and the things that happened after Charlie's death, like the plane that is almost exclusively used by Pete Hegseth. I don't know if you know this or not, but that plane has a tail number, and everybody can just log onto their computers if you open it up and go to like Flight Aware, Flight Radar, whatever it is. His tail number on the plane that he almost exclusively uses is 99-0404. 99-0404. And on September 8th, 2025, 2 days before Charlie was killed, that plane left Joint Base Andrews in the Washington, D.C. area. And after making a couple of other stops, it went to Fort Huachuca, which has been, of course, made popular by Candace Owens and Mitch Snow's appearance on her podcast, where he said that he saw Erica Kirk with Cabot Phillips on September 8th in the lobby of the Candlewood Inn and Suites on Fort Huachuca. And this is a military base where Erica Kirk's mother, Lori Franzfay, works. She's a defense contractor directly tied to. She tests the weapons of war for the future. And, Cabot Phillips is an ex-boyfriend of Erica Franzfay Kirk. Charlie's alleged wife. And that plane landed there under a special air mission call sign, SAM 112. So for your audience, I'll just kind of preface all of this by saying that a SAM identifier, special air mission, can only be approved or ordered up by one of two people. That's it. The President of the United States or the Vice President of the United States. That's it. So that means that the people who are on that plane are doing the business of sending a message for or receiving a message for either the President or the Vice President. They're conducting in-person business on behalf of one of those two people. And that plane landed at Fort Huachuca 2 days before September 10th at Utah Valley University. A month later, exactly on October 10th, 2025, that same plane, tail number 99-0404, under a different SAM call sign, SAM 702, took a direct flight from Joint Base Andrews in the DC area back to Fort Huachuca again, and then went back to Joint Base Andrews, but this time it took a detour over eastern Tennessee, where there was a munitions plant that had exploded and it was smoldering. That munitions plant was called AES, Accurate Energetic Systems. They're a defense contractor, and they produce explosives. There was a $440,000 order from the Department of Defense to AES just ahead of Charlie Kirk's assassination for something called an anti-personnel micro-explosive. Okay. We know that from the evidence that we've seen, there's no way that you could conclude that Charlie Kirk was in fact taken out by Tyler Robinson, the cross-eyed sniper, with his grandfather's stolen 30-06. That didn't happen. And when you look at what happened to Charlie's shirt at the time of the incident, you can see that it poofs out, which suggests that there was probably some sort of a charge underneath his shirt. And that plane flew over that plant on the day that it exploded. 23,000 pounds of explosives just blew up. And the plane, almost exclusively used by Pete Hegseth, is reducing its altitude, taking a detour over eastern Tennessee, dipping way south before it went to Joint Base Andrews at the very time that that plant was on fire. It killed everybody inside, by the way. Every employee that worked for AES is dead. After fulfilling a DoD contract for a micro-explosive, anti-personnel micro-explosive that, by the way, was delivered to Orem, Utah by way of a private jet. There was a private jet that left Orem, Utah, just ahead of Charlie Kirk's death, and went to eastern Tennessee, where there is nothing else. It's a very rural area, and landed just near this AES facility, and then went back immediately before Charlie was taken out and silenced forever. When you try to put these things into uncensored AI or into Grok, and you ask, what are the odds of all of these things happening? Grok's answer was, it's incalculable. The odds of all of these things organically happening together is incalculable. And so I think that it's, with Candace kind of positioning herself as the front runner in this investigation into Charlie Kirk, she needs to be talking about this. And I wish that Tucker would start talking about this as well, just given the fact that I know that he was really close with Charlie Kirk. And, I also too know that he's, very much kind of in alliance with Charlie Kirk in the sense that he's now outspoken and vehemently against the war efforts in Iran and what happened in Venezuela. Which, by the way, what happened in Venezuela, Americans were cheering this on, like my dad, saying, hey, well, now we're going to be able to get oil on the cheap. Well, that oil, that refined oil, is now going directly to, it's not even coming here. The first shipment of oil that left Venezuela in a post-Nicolas Maduro kidnapping world went to. So everything that we have heard about Venezuela is a lie. Everything that we've heard about Greenland is a lie. Cuba, Colombia, they're on the chopping block. Anybody that doesn't have a Rothschild-controlled central banking system firmly entrenched into their country with a usurious grip on the economic apparatus in these countries is on the chopping block. And we have seen time and time again what has happened when that's the case. There is a short list of countries that the American war empire has been charged with the duty of dismantling and effecting regime changes through either successful or attempted failed color revolutions. And then we saw the failed Iranian uranium heist that was led by Donald Trump's military, Pete Hegseth's military, where they flew in, and there was a plan that we had reported on before this incident even happened, because we caught wind of the plan that had been proposed to the president, where excavation equipment and a contingent of American service members and, with air support provided by fighter jets and stealth bombers, they were going to go in there and they were going to extract Iranian uranium from deep inside of the mountains and build a makeshift runway, all well under enemy fire, and then try to escape with this uranium. And we saw what the results of that were, because we've all seen the images of the downed C-130s and fighter jets. We've seen the charred remains of what appear to be American servicemen. And we know that C-130s don't carry one guy or two guys. They carry a massive amount of personnel and heavy equipment. And they tried to pull this off. And of course, it's an absurd mission to even think that you could accomplish while under enemy fire. They tried it. It failed. The deaths in this war have been classified for the first time since Vietnam, meaning that if you have a son that goes and fights in this war, or says, hey, I'm off to training somewhere because it's a classified mission, and they never come back, and you contact the Department of War, the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy or the Army or the Marine Corps or the Air Force, and you ask what happened to my son, they'll tell you that's classified. Well, he never returned. Well, that's classified. And if you figure out what happened to your son, that he was killed in Iran, and you start talking about it, then you'll go to prison for revealing classified government information, like as if you're, Edward Snowden doing a favor heroically to try to tell the American people that they're, being spied on. So it's just the end result here, I think, is that there is going to be the commitment to a massive attempted ground invasion of Iran, because the only way to successfully complete the objective of Greater Israel is to topple the last domino standing on the way to the conquest of Greater Israel, and that domino in the Middle East is Iran. It can't be done by the air. We don't have the air superiority that the government tells us that we do. We've seen stealth fighters taken down. We've seen fighter jets taken down. We've seen bombers taken down. We don't control the Strait of Hormuz. Iran does. And they do that with the support of their allies in Russia and China, who have deployed assets to those regions as well. The waterways are militarily controlled by Iran and by Russia and by China, and they're not going to allow the United States in there to continue this war of aggression on behalf of the Epstein class. So there's kind of, I think, a stalemate here, as I would suggest that likely in a classified and secretive kind of way, there is a massive contingent of young American men who are being prepared to be fed headfirst into this meat grinder.
Wow. There's a couple more questions. Tell me, you've been covering this a lot. What's current with the Epstein class, the files? Is anybody being brought to justice with this?
No. And until, I would say, either the American public or preferably, all of the world is able to know with absolute certainty. And, I don't think that we all need to view the tapes. I just think that would be horrible for people's souls. I don't think that's a good idea. But if there were a way for the world population, for all of humanity, or even just the United States, the American population, to be able to know with absolute certainty what was being done to these victims and by whom, that is the catalyst. That is the linchpin. That is the straw that will break the camel's back and bring the entire system of governance throughout the West, which is basically a one-world government at this point. It is. There are no sovereign governments throughout the West. The West is completely and totally subservient to the Epstein class, whatever you want to call them, the government, the nation state, however you want to say this. I don't recognize this as being a legitimate country. It is the front lines of the military-industrial complex. It is a warehouse for munitions. It is a safe haven for PDF files, and it's not a legitimate country. But that the class of people who use this as their buffer, as their barrier for protection, that class of people, I think there would be no safe place in the world that they could hide. If people were to know with absolute certainty that it is these household names that you suspect that are on tape doing unimaginable and horrific things to snuff out childhood innocence, I think that would bring the whole system down, which is exactly, listen, the idea here is to keep, you mentioned earlier at the top of the interview, pitting Christians and Muslims against each other. I think that it goes beyond that. Of course, there's factions, Republican, Democrat, right, left, liberal, conservative, gay, straight, black, white. There are all kinds of wedge issues. And they call them wedge issues because that's exactly what they do. They drive a wedge between people in order to keep the American people and also just, well-intended, good-hearted, just human beings all over the world in the East and the West, to keep them at each other's throats. And if you look at America and just isolate the United States, you would find that it is, I believe, a very clear mission to keep Americans fighting horizontally so that they will never look to fight vertically.
Well, just going off what you said, and I'll end with this. You were describing to your father all the issues that we're having as a country, as Americans, the country basically imploding from within, gas prices skyrocketing, groceries, healthcare, people are losing their savings. It's just out of control. But somehow you have a group of politicians holding meetings in Congress, scaring people about Islam. Have you seen some of these? And,
they're all over the place. Yes. Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, the number one state sponsor of terror, and axis of evil verbiage vernacular has been used by the American occupied media apparatus ever since I was a child. I remember actually having, those little plastic green army figurines. As a young boy, I had them.
G.I. Joe? The G.I. Joes?
They were kind of that, but they were even smaller. They were not G.I. Joe brand. They were just these cheap plastic, and you had the guys holding the rifles, and you had the guys with the RPGs. My dad used to get pissed off because he'd wake up in the morning and come stumbling out to grab his coffee, and he would step on them, and they hurt like these Legos or Micro Machines would. He'd step on them, that would piss him off. But they came equipped with like Russian and Chinese flags, because we were supposed to hate Russia and China. And they've done this with the East, methodically and unrelentingly throughout my entire lifetime, is to get you to feel like this unsympathetic group of people are terrorists, the brown people, the sand people, the Arabs, the towel heads, whatever words have been thrown around. And they have been used to make Americans believe that this is the source of evil, and when in fact the source of evil comes from within, and that the American military doesn't act in the interest of the American people. If it did, it would be functioning as a military is designed to function. Let me just pose the very simple question. There is no Hegelian dialectic here. This is not complex. You don't have to be high IQ to understand that the core function of a military is to protect its country, correct? Isn't the core function of an army to protect the borders of your country, your camp, your nation? Isn't that the idea, to protect your people from an invasion, from an aggressive outside force? That's what the Iranians have done for 200 years. They've never gone and invaded another country. Nobody can point to Americans who have been killed by the Iranians on U.S. soil. They've been killed in the Middle East as they have been threatening to invade Iran. And so Iran is using their military as a military is supposed to be used, in the defense of their country. If the American military were being used in the defense of its country, or as it is supposed to be used when a young man puts his hand on the Bible and raises his hand and swears an oath to the Constitution to protect and defend the Constitution and the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, then our military would be securing our airspace, our waterways, the international waters that surround our country, our borders. We would have militarized borders. We would be using force to stop any kind of militaristic physical invasion of our country, and to protect its people from any harm that may come as a result of that physical invasion. But we have vacated our borders, and we have deployed our military and built installations all over the world. I mean, we're still in Germany. We have American military bases in Germany. For what? I mean, World War II was over a long time ago. What is the purpose for us having military bases all over the place? It is to reinforce the aspirations, the goals of the expansionists, of the Rothschild central banksters. That's That's the idea here. It is to ensure that they act in accordance with, the guidelines, the rules, the conditions that have been set forth by that banking cabal. And so I don't know if that answers your question or not. I kind of forgot what it is at this point, to be honest with you.
Last question, real quick. What's your analysis on what's happening recently between Dan Bilzerian and Nick Fuentes? You've kind of spoken on this. What have you come up with?
If I'm to use my own eyes and be objective, we'll take Dan Bilzerian first of all. Dan is a guy who had there was no benefit to him. There was no upside for him to engage in the conversation about its control over American politics or our government or unelected class of bureaucrats. There was no upside for him. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He's been on Instagram for 15 years, driving tanks, using firearms, surrounded by the world's most beautiful women, going to the world's most beautiful places, doing whatever he wants. He's got a private jet, a nice one, a big one. He can do whatever he wants and live the life that most men would envy because very few people get to live that life. So to engage in a conversation about supremacy or to engage in a conversation about, the parasitical relationship between Israel and the American government, there's just no upside. And he did that anyways. So first of all, I just have a tremendous amount of respect for that. And as a result of that, he took arrows financially. He was voted off of his own company by his board as the CEO of Ignite. He was dragged through the mud and he went through, all of the slander and defamation from the American media apparatus, which obviously is controlled by the same people that are controlling the war profiteers. And then on top of that, he announced a candidacy for elected office against Randy Fine. Now, Randy Fine is the guy that, while he was a state legislator in Florida, he sponsored legislation that makes it a criminal act in Florida to pass out flyers that are critical of it. This is anti-free speech legislation in a free speech country. And that legislation was signed into law by Governor Ron DeSantis, and it was signed into law by Governor Ron DeSantis on Israeli soil with Benjamin Netanyahu looking over his shoulder. So he's signing legislation sponsored by Randy Fine on foreign soil. There's no more clear-cut treason than this. Randy Fine later then was caught on video subverting the American political process. In my opinion, this is sedition at minimum, probably more likely treason, but that would be up to a military tribunal to weed through if there was any kind of accountability in this country, which there doesn't seem to be, as Tucker was just talking about earlier. Are
you talking about when he was pressing the buttons there?
He was voting for other members when he thought nobody was looking and when he thought that there was no cameras on him, and he was caught on video doing this. Nobody has talked about this. And then, in reward for acting as a good and faithful servant to Israel, which is where his priorities are, he was promoted to United States Congress as an actor to play his role now as a federal lawmaker to now nationalize this kind of subversion and subjugation and this kind of occupation of the American political apparatus where he can now commit treason or sedition at the federal level. And so Dan Bilzerian obviously is opposing the right guy. This is, Randy Fine is the epitome of everything wrong with the American political system. And Dan Bilzerian chose to take that on. And as a result, he got no support from Nick Fuentes, who has shown more support for Jeffrey Epstein than he has for Thomas Massey or Dan Bilzerian. And I don't know what prompted Dan to tweet, or publish a post on X that said that Nick was a Fed. I don't know what prompted that. But Nick's response to this has been to attack Dan Bilzerian and attack his campaign to ensure that Randy Fine is reinstalled. And then very openly, Fuentes has also backed a Jewess, a woman and a Democrat, to be Ohio's next governor. And he has thrown stones at Casey Putsch, who is an anti-Zionist candidate. And so I guess if I'm just using my own eyes, Nick Fuentes appears to be an agent of chaos who is kind of glamorizing, or not just kind of, he's overtly glamorizing Jeffrey Epstein. He's selling a quarter zip replica of a convicted child sex trafficking PDF file. That's enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot more to this than that. There is no glamorization. Jeffrey Epstein was not a cool guy who had aura. No, he was a convicted child sex trafficking PDF file who preyed on thousands and thousands of young people. And the people that Nick Fuentes has surrounded himself with, the list goes on and on. Nick tells his own followers that the best idea is to stay out of the gym because that's gay. It's gay to go to the gym and be fit. To not have a girlfriend or procreate or be married and have children and a nuclear family because that's gay. I guess the only not gay thing is to actually be gay. And, you know, there's videos that have come out of him on dates with this cat boy, you know, this very effeminate stuff. I believe that Nick Fuentes is a closeted homosexual, which, you know, whatever. But the danger in Nick Fuentes is that he is a very articulate, very well-spoken, very well-read, charismatic, influential Zoomer who has a platform that has been astroturfed, that has been propped up by the media apparatus in the same way that Donald Trump has. In the wake of Charlie Kirk's death, if you just go and look at Google Trends and you look at name search queries, you will see that there was probably no single beneficiary that benefited more from Charlie Kirk's death in the way of, you know, so-called right-wing conservative commentators than Nick Fuentes did. Nick Fuentes is the single most rewarded benefactor and beneficiary of Charlie Kirk's death. And then immediately after that, he was propped up by all of these rags. Well, there's a reason for that. And then he, of course, went on with Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. And I think Dave Rubin, maybe, or Dave Smith. He went on with Steven Crowder, Tim Pool. A lot of other people propped him up. Tim Pool, by the way, who met with Benjamin Netanyahu personally. Nobody was supposed to know that. Nick probably has as well. And at this point, I would say that I don't think Nick is a Fed. I think that he is an agent of Mossad. And I'm saying that because of the evidence that would suggest that. And so he is an agent of chaos, but he's dangerous because of his charisma. He's dangerous because of the audience that he has been able to captivate in the same exact way, using the same exact formula as Donald Trump. And Nick is on record saying multiple times that he studied Donald Trump. And you can see it in his mannerisms. You can see it in his hand gestures. You can see it in his cadence and delivery, and some of the vernacular, some of the verbiage that he uses and throws around, some of the phrasing. And this is the kind of pathway to be involved in the pipeline that I spoke of earlier. And the pipeline of actors includes, you know, the creation of Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance. I think that they had the idea that Erica Kirk was going to be one of these people who maybe could have been a running mate potentially for J.D. Vance in the wake of Charlie's death, because I think at that point it probably was Charlie Kirk that they had slated to run in the VP area for J.D. Vance. And then ultimately in, you know, maybe 2032, a presidential run for Charlie Kirk. But given the real world, real time, you know, on video documented awakening that Charlie Kirk was having in the days, weeks, and months leading up to September 10th, I think that candidacy would have maybe been an opposition to J.D. Vance. And I think that platform, the presidential platform, may have looked a lot different than what Miriam Adelson or AIPAC or the controlling puppeteers in our country would have wanted for Charlie Kirk's candidacy and platform to look like. And so that, I believe, is why Nick Fuentes has now been kind of selected and thrown into that pipeline, because he's willing to play ball. And why? I don't know. If there's compromat that has been gained, if he's been compromised in some way, maybe on that date with the cat boy, maybe something is on video that he doesn't want the world to know about. I know that he hangs out with this Beardson Beardley guy who Nick says is like his mentor and best friend, who's on video a whole lot in what appears to be grooming middle school girls. I mean, they're wearing braces, and he wants to look at their feet. And, you know, he's saying things like, I bet you F black guys. And, you know, I mean, just he's talking to middle schoolers. So it's concerning, but it's also very obvious that, I mean, if you're going to support anybody for Congress who's currently running for political office, Dan Bilzerian for somebody who's opposed to this agenda, to the agenda of greater Israel, to the subversion of our own government and its political process, and the detriment and the suffering and the plight that has been brought to the front door of every American by way of spiritual and economic and physical attack, it would be Dan Bilzerian. And instead, he's trying to attempt to derail that to ensure that Randy Fine is reinstalled. So, I mean, and then he's telling you that that's America first, and that if you don't believe that that's America first, that you're a low IQ, irrelevant anti-Semite. Well, he sells Jeffrey Epstein quarter zips. So it's pretty clear when you're championing a convicted child sex trafficking PDF file and trying to subvert a true America first anti-Zionist candidate for Congress. That's what you're doing, and there's no 6 million D chess being played here. That's what it is. So anyway, that's how I feel about that. I support and endorse thoroughly and completely Dan Bilzerian's candidacy for office, whatever that means, and whatever kind of weight that carries. But if you are an America First person who wants to end this, and you believe that we can still make a difference, or that there is a political solution under the current apparatus that calls itself a federal government, which looks to be more of a corporate crime syndicate, then, you would cast your vote for somebody like Thomas Massey. You would go and you would try to vote Dan Bilzerian into office. You would try to get James Fishback elected. You would try to get Casey Putsch elected. You would try to get Joel Oltmann elected, I believe. I don't know much about Joel Oltmann, but it seems that he is very anti-Zionist and is against the wars and that are being fought on behalf of. So, I mean, I think it's obvious what's happening with Nick Fuentes. And I think that is, people shouldn't probably listen to him anymore.
Stu, thank you very much for spending some time with us. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.